Hi everybody, it's Cindy here. Thanks for coming back to my channel. If you watched my previous video that I just did on wallpaper samples, you'll see that I am destashing my studio because I have some big plans for 2021 and I really need to get rid of some stuff that I'm just not going to get to anytime soon. And so I had a bunch of wallpaper. I'm still trying to get that in the shop. And I also have a ton of postcards. This is only the tip of the iceberg. And some of them I want to make into digital kits. And as you know, we have to really be cognizant to make sure that they're in the public domain. So I've been doing a little bit of research to find out how I can date these postcards to make sure that they're pre 1924. And I thought you might be interested in what I'm finding. Now, this is not legal advice. Do your own research. I'm just telling you some of the interesting facts that I found out about postcards while I was doing my research. So, um, postcards are, you can, they have different eras. And I'm going to list them down below because I'm going to be spewing a lot of numbers and dates and whatnot. So I'll kind of summarize down below. The first era that postcards were made is called the Pioneer Era. That was 1893 to 1891, and actually they were the earliest picture postcards were those sold at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. And I don't have any of those to show you. I am so enamored of the Chicago Exposition and the things that were invented and the technology that came about from that exposition. I just love anything to do with the Chicago World's Fair. And believe me, if I ever happen to see one that says World's World Columbian Exposition on the front of it, I'll pay anything for it probably. Not true, but I love things from that area, and I don't have any. Um, so that's around 1893, and at that point, messages were not allowed to be um, put on the back of your card. Let me see if I have one here. Like this. You were not allowed to write on the back of your card, write a message. You could only do the name and address of where you were sending it. So that the early cards you couldn't put a message on the back. You could just mail it. So then we have the next era, which is called private mailing card era, and sometimes you'll see private mailing card on the top here. Why is this so shadowy? And that era is 1898 to 1901, just a couple of years. In 1898, Congress granted private printers permission to print and sell cards that bore the inscription private mailing card. And again, I don't have any of those either. But still, no message was allowed to be on the back of the card. And they weren't really widely used at that point. So then we have the era that is of most interest to most of us are going to find postcards starting in 1901. So 1901 to 1907 is called the postcard era. This is when you will start to see the word postcard on the top. And actually that was a regulation from the post office that it had to say the word postcard had to appear at the top. And but writing was still not permitted on the address side. So I have some examples. Oh my goodness, what is happening? Hang on one sec. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what my camera was doing there. So where was I? So writing was still not permitted on the back. And I have a bunch of these. Some of these are really fun. One is likely to be held up, and he's a drunk guy It says 12 midnight, and he's drunk, trying to make his way home in a tipsy manner, it looks like. So um, you can see that there was just room. It says postcard here. There was just room for the name and address. You were not allowed to write on these. So that's one clue. Um, then there's the early divided back era, and that's 1907 to 1914, and that is when postcards with a divided back were permitted in the US. And so that started in March of 1907. So the address had to be printed on the right side, and the left side was for writing messages. And this was kind of considered the golden age of postcards. Sorry for my camera today, guys. Um, but I wanted to be able to get this up and try to get the camera to focus on some of these. So I have to have the autofocus on. So on the right side, it says the address to be written on this side for correspondence. So this is called the early divided back era. And so you can see that we start to have that line down the middle, and people can write messages on the postcards. Then we have from 1915 to 1930, we have the white border era. And most U.S. postcards were printed during this period. And by the way, I should have said at the beginning, this is only for U.S. postcards. I have a whole stack of French postcards here and Canadian postcards. Isn't she beautiful? Um, and these are still attached in books, and they have really cool protective onion skin in between each postcard. I have all of these, but that's a whole separate dating thing. So I'm just talking about U.S. postcards at this point. So now we have the white border era, which is 1915 to 1930 approximately. And to save ink, the publishers actually left a white border around the view. That's how they get their name, white border cards. And they tend, at this point, the quality of the postcard tends to be a lot poorer, because at this point there was labor costs were really high. People were inexperienced at making these, and they would put something on the front and then public taste would change, and it resulted in a lot of poor quality cards during this period, and a lot of the publishers ended up going out of business. But you can see that I have a lot of these, and I can if you the camera's not going to show, but oh, I was looking for this. Thank you. Uh, and but I can tell, I don't know if you can, that the quality just is not really, whoops, as good as what you see on the earlier postcards. So that's, this one doesn't belong in there. That's a little older, but I haven't gone through these yet. So that's the white border era, 1915 to 1930. Then we have the linen era 1930 to 1945, and this is when a new printing process came about, where they could print on postcards with a high rag content. So it caused it to almost feel like linen, and it really took color very well. So on the linen cards, not only does it have a different texture, but quite often you'll see really gaudy colors on these postcards, and they usually had either important events or scenes in history that were documented on these cards. So obviously you can't feel this, and it's probably not going to be able to be seen. I don't think the texture is going to be able to be seen on here. I don't know if you can see the ridges. Probably not. But this is a linen card, 1930 to 1945. Then we have some other eras, the photochrome era, and that's where three-dimensional cards, and I had one of those, but I couldn't find it. But that's when three-dimensional postcards also started appearing, and the the process got even cheaper than this. And so when you look at a photochrome era postcard, you will see all of the little dots. If you look under a magnifying glass, you'll see a dot pattern, and that's characteristic of these photochrome era cards. The other thing, there are other ways to identify. I was just trying to have this out here for contrast. I just bought this the other day. A guy on Facebook apparently is an ephemera hoarder, and he's going to let me go through all of his stuff, guys. He used to sell a little bit of stuff there was a roller rink near us that was sort of a flea market, and he used to sell his stuff there, and now because of COVID he doesn't, so I'm going to get to go through his stuff. I'm so excited. I mean, this thing is very old, and it's like in brand new condition and never used. It was 15 cents at Woolworth's back in the day. So anyway, just a little sidebar there. But the other way, let me get my mat, my very dirty mat out here, and see if I can get it in camera. It's upside down, Cindy. Okay. I want you to be able to see the numbers. Okay. So the photochrome era that we were just talking about, that is when, well, by the 1960s, actually, during that photochrome era, I keep saying era, the standard size of the cards grew. They got bigger to 4 by 6 inches. You will see that your pre-1960s postcards are smaller than 4 by 6. These are actually 5.5 by 3.5 approximately. So after 1960, they got a lot bigger. The other way you can tell, might as well keep this here now. Nah, too dark. Another way that you can tell is, of course, by the stamp. So some of them might have been actually mailed. That's not going to come through there, but that says, I don't know if you can see that says 1907. And there's a 1-cent stamp. So just because it was mailed in 1907 doesn't mean that it was made in 1907, but we know it's at least that old, and from what we've learned, it has the word postcard across the top. But in terms of stamps, you can start to kind of date your postcard a little bit. So up until 1917, the post office required 1-cent stamps. In 1917, they briefly went up to 2 cents, and that was that had something to do with the war. They wanted to. It was a wartime measure, so it went up briefly for a year or two, 1917, and then in 1918 it went back down to 1 cent again, and stayed that way until 1952. So if you have a 1-cent stamp, you at least know it's pre-1952. That's kind of a broad range, but that's one way that you can try to start dating your postcards. And then, of course, then you just want to look to, you have all your little clues by looking at the content of the picture. What kind of clothes are they wearing? What's the brand name on the front? Do you see any horse-drawn vehicles, or are there cars? And what model cars? How are there any interior decorations? I'm trying to find some good examples here, but um, what kind of appliances and furnishings are on the front? Some of these historic ones I have, was it even a park? When did this park, when was it established? So that kind of takes a little more research if you want to actually research each individual one. Look at the picture content. Again, we already talked about the postcard size and the printing process. You can also look at zip codes. Now, two-digit zip codes weren't introduced until 1943. So I know that this postcard is at least 1943 because there's no zip code. So they were two-digit zip codes starting in 1943, and then in 1963, that's when the five-digit zip code started. So that's another way to just kind of gauge it by looking at that as well. So so if the card is larger than 3.5 by 5.5 inches, it also may date from before 1898. And if it's old and slightly smaller than 3.5 by 5.5 inches, it's probably around 1898 to 1902. We talked about the size earlier, just looking at my notes and making sure I'm. And then if it measures 3.5 by 5.5, which is what most of mine are, it was probably made between 1902 and 1970, so that's a wide range. So some actually have a copyright on the front. So this is copyright 1941. And look at the content. Oh, this is a linen one actually too. Um, Now, just because it was copyrighted in 1941 doesn't mean it was printed in 1941. It might have been printed after that. Let me put that in my linen pile. And I think that's about all I have to say. I want to show you a couple of these funny ones that I'm going to put up at our outhouse at camp. he's he's going to the outhouse, straining to reach my goal. I hope I can make it. Puff, puff, puff. And he's heading up to the outhouse. I thought that was funny. And there was another outhouse one in here, too. Oh, yeah. A couple of stinkers. Beat me to it, eh? I love these. And actually, that is a linen one, too. Cool. And the ones that I picked up recently, just to show you some of the ones from the 1901 era, they're just really, really super pretty. And these are the ones that I'm going to be making into a kit. Just really, really cool. That's a little older because you can see by their clothing and by the, well, you can't see, but I can tell by the way it's printed that that's a little bit of an older one. That goes in that pile. Oh, here's another outhouse one. This person must have loved outhouses. I can't be too choosy now. When you gotta go, you gotta go. And there's a porcupine and a spider web. That would be me in the middle of the night when I just have to get up and walk out to the outhouse. I'm like, okay, I hope there aren't any bears or critters around. That's going in the outhouse pile. And then look how pretty that one is. The proposal. These are just gorgeous, these ones that I just recently picked up from the hoarder guy. And you can tell some of them are quite old. And this one, he's actually, I'm going to strike for a raise. So, yeah, so I'm just going through my postcards. Keep an eye on my shop. If you're interested, a lot of these are going to be going in the shop as physical items as well as digital. And the best way to not miss something if I'm putting in my shop is to go over to the Scrapologist on Etsy. There's a link below, and favorite my shop. And then anytime I put something in there, you'll get a little notice in your Etsy feed there. And I'm pretty sure I still have it set up that if you favorite my shop, you get a coupon too. So you might want to check that out. All right, well, I hope this was a little bit of fun information for you today. I've had fun sharing it with you and going through my postcards that have been sitting here forever. Just need to destash some of these. So, hey, get your postcards out and have a little bit of fun with them. And I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.